Part 2, Gandhi in India, January 9th th. 1915, March 23, 1946. Chapter 1, Home in India. Do I contradict myself? Gandhi asked. Consistency is a hobgoblin. No ism held him rigid in its grip. No theory guided his thoughts or actions. He strove to keep his mind open. He reserved the right to differ with himself. His life, Gandhi said, was an unending experiment. He experimented even in his 70s. There was nothing set about him. He was not a conforming Hindu, nor a conforming nationalist, nor a conforming pacifist. Gandhi was independent, unfettered, unpredictable, hence exciting and difficult. A conversation with him was a voyage of discovery. He dared to go anywhere without a chart. Under attack, he rarely defended himself. Happily, adjusted in India, he never condemned anyone. Humble and simple, he did not have to pretend dignity. Thus relieved of uncreative mental tasks, he was free to be creative. Nor did he say or do anything merely to gain popularity or win or mollify followers. He upset the apple cart frequently. His inner need to perform a given act took precedence over its possible effects on his supporters. 2 days before Gandhi, Mrs. Gandhi and Kallenbach reached England from South Africa, the First World War broke out. Gandhi felt that Indians ought to do their bit for Britain. He accordingly volunteered to raise an ambulance corps headed by himself. 80 Indians, most of them university students in the United Kingdom, volunteered. Gandhi had no delusions. Those who confine themselves to attending to the wounded in battle cannot be absolved from the guilt of war. Then how, Gandhi's friends protested, could he, the man of non-violence, participate in a war? Gandhi answered in effect, I accept the benefits and protection of the British Empire. I have not tried to destroy it. Why should I allow it to be destroyed? A modern nation is only quantitatively less violent in peacetime than in wartime, and unless one non-collaborates in peacetime, one is merely sapping one's conscience by non-collaborating in wartime. Why pay taxes to make the arms which kill? Why obey the kind of officials who will make a war? Unless you surrender citizenship or go to jail before the war, you belong in the army during the war. Gandhi's support of the war was personally painful and politically harmful. But he preferred truth to comfort. While the minor tempest over his pro-war attitude raged around Gandhi's head, his pleurisy, aggravated by too much fasting, took a serious turn and the doctor ordered him home to India. He arrived in Bombay with Kasturbai on January 9, 1915. Gandhi asked his interlocutors, whom he groups as reader, how they see the future independence of India. As is Japan, reader replies, so must India be. We must own our own navy, our army, and we must have our own splendor, and then will India's voice ring through the world. In other words, Gandhi comments, you want English rule without the Englishman. You want the tiger's nature without the tiger. You would make India English. This is not the Swaraj I want. Gokul told Gandhi in South Africa, and the booklet was crude and hastily conceived. Some parts, notably those on British domestic politics, are. On the other hand, Count Leo Tolstoy praised its philosophy. It has abiding interest for Gandhi's definition of Swaraj or home rule. Some Englishmen, Gandhi wrote, state that they took and hold India by the sword. Both statements are wrong. The sword is entirely useless for holding India. We alone keep them. We like their commerce. They please us by their subtle methods and get what they want from us. We further strengthen their hold by quarreling amongst ourselves. India is being ground down not under the British heel, but under that of modern civilization. Then he inveighed against India's use of railways and machinery. Foreigners, and Indians, frequently challenged Gandhi on his hostility to the modern machine. The several editions of Hind Swaraj report some of these discussions. In 1924, for instance, Gandhi was asked whether he objected to all machinery. And would you not need big factories to produce little devices like singers? Yes, Gandhi agreed. Then, since he liked to close the circle of every argument and come back to his starting point. Gandhi said, "Ideally, I would rule out all machinery, even as I would reject this very body, which is not helpful to salvation, and seek the absolute liberation of the soul. From that point of view, I would reject all machinery, but machines would remain because, like the body, they are inevitable." Thus he upheld the principle yet admitted the contention. Gandhi was not anti-machine. He merely realized earlier than many others the dangers and horrors of a civilization in which the individual is somewhat in the position of a savage who makes an idol and then makes sacrifices to appease it. The faster machines move, the faster man lives, and the greater his nervous tensions and his cultural and social tributes to speed. Gandhi would have had less objection to machinery if it merely served the body. He did not want it to invade the mind and maim the spirit. He believed that India's mission was to elevate the moral being. Therefore, if the English become Indianized, we can accommodate them. Such a thing has never happened, Reader objected. To believe that what has not occurred in history will not occur at all, Gandhi replied, is to argue disbelief in the dignity of man. He had the soul of an Eastern prophet and the spirit of a Western pioneer. If you believe that because Italians rule Italy the Italian nation is happy, you are groping in darkness. According to Mazzini, freedom meant the whole of the Italian people, that is, its agriculturists. The Italy of Mazzini still remains in a state of slavery. It would be folly to assume, Gandhi added, that an Indian Rockefeller would be better than an American Rockefeller. Gandhi saw the flaws in Western culture, but he took much from it. His defense of the individual against the community and man against the machine is in tune with Ruskin, Thoreau, Mazzini, and the utopian, not Marxist, socialists. Ideologically, Gandhi stood with one foot in the deep individualistic current of the first half of Europe's 19th century and the other in the turbulent nationalistic current of the second half of that century. The two streams merged in him, and he endeavored to achieve the same synthesis in the Indian independence movement. Gandhi asked England to quit India, but he did not want India to quit England. He cultivated cultural and other ties with Britain. In 1936, for instance, he gave an Indian student named Kamal Nayan Bajai a letter of introduction to Henry Pollock in London, in which he said, "However much we may fight Great Britain, London is increasingly our Mecca." I have advised him to take up a course in the London School of Economics. His nationalism lacked the usual concomitants of nationalism, exclusiveness and hostility towards other countries. "My patriotism," Gandhi declared, "is subservient to my religion." He was too religious to serve one land, one race, one caste, one family, one person, or even one religion. His religion was humanity. Gandhi planted these ideas as he moved up and down India during that probationary first year Gokul had enjoined upon him. He studied and learned, but contrary to orders he talked. He talked at banquets celebrating his South African exploits. He attended them with a silent Kasturbai, whom he lauded as his helpful partner. At a dinner in April 1915, in Madras, he defended his recruiting campaign for the British Army. This speech was pro-West. "I discovered," he said, "that the British Empire had certain ideals with which I have fallen in love, and one of those ideals is that every subject of the British Empire has the freest scope possible for his energy and honor, and whatever he thinks is due to his conscience. I think that is true of the British government as it is true of no other government. I have more than once said that that government is best which governs least. I have found that it is possible for me to be governed least under the British Empire. Hence my loyalty to the British Empire." He took the unpopular side. Gandhi's speeches were delivered in a weak, unimpressive, conversational tone. He had been heralded as the hero of Natal and the Transvaal, the person who defeated Smutes. The Indian nationalists had expected a new giant, a lion of a man who might lead them to independence. Gokul died in 1915. They were disappointed. Instead of a likely candidate for the succession, They saw a thin little figure dressed in a ridiculously large turban and flapping loincloth who could scarcely make himself heard. There were no loudspeakers, and neither thrilled nor stimulated his audience. Yet Gandhi would soon remake the entire nationalist movement of India. Simultaneously with Gandhi's departure from Phoenix Farm, his own family, with other families, also left South Africa for India. As the best place for the temporary sojourn of the boys in this group, Gandhi chose Shantiniketan, a school in Bengal, eastern India, maintained by Rabindranath Tagore, India's great novelist and poet laureate who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. Gandhi and Tagore were contemporaries and closely linked as chief agents of India's 20th century regeneration. But Gandhi was the wheat field and Tagore the rose garden. Gandhi was the working arm, Tagore the singing voice, Gandhi the general, Tagore the herald, Gandhi the emaciated ascetic with shaven head and face, Tagore the large, white-maned, white-bearded aristocrat intellectual with a face of classic, patriarchal beauty. Gandhi exemplified stark renunciation. Tagore felt the embrace of freedom in 1,000 bonds of delight. Yet both were united by their love of India and mankind. Tagore wept at seeing his India the eternal ragpicker at other people's dust not sign bins, and prayed for the magnificent harmony of all human races. Tagore believed, with Gandhi, that India's shackles were self-made. Prisoner, tell me who was it that wrought this unbreakable chain? It was I, said the prisoner, who forged this chain very carefully. Tagore and Gandhi, the greatest Indians of the first half of the 20th century, revered one another. It was Tagore, apparently, who conferred on Gandhi the title of Mahatma, the great soul in beggar's garb, Tagore said. Gandhi called Tagore the great sentinel. Sentimentally inseparable, soulmates to the end, they waged verbal battles, for they were different. Gandhi faced the past and out of it made future history. Religion, caste, Hindu mythology were deeply ingrained in him. Tagore accepted the present, with its machines, its Western culture and, despite it, made Eastern poetry. Perhaps, since provincial origins are so important in India, it was the difference between isolated Gujarat and cosmopolitan Bengal. Gandhi was frugal. Tagore was prodigal. The suffering millions, Gandhi wrote to Tagore, asked for one poem, invigorating food. Tagore gave them music. At Shantiniketan, Tagore's pupils sang and danced, wove garlands and made life sweet and beautiful. When Gandhi arrived there, shortly after his return to India, to see how his Phoenix Farm boys were faring, he turned the place upside down. With the help of Charles Freer Andrews and William W. Pearson, his friends in South Africa, Gandhi persuaded the entire community of 125 boys and their teachers to run the kitchen, handle the garbage, clean the latrines, sweep the grounds and, in general, forsake the muse for the monk. Tagore acquiesced tolerantly and said, the experiment contains the key to Swaraj home rule. But austerity was uncongenial and, when Gandhi left to attend Gokul's funeral, the experiment collapsed. Gandhi, however, sought his own hermitage or ashram where he, his family and friends and nearest co-workers would make their permanent home in an atmosphere of renunciation and service. Gandhi's life now had no room for private law practice or private relations with wife and sons. A foreigner once said to Gandhi, "How is your family?" "All of India is my family," Gandhi replied. Thus dedicated, Gandhi founded the Satyagraha Ashram first at Kakrab and then, permanently, at Sabarmati, across the Sabarmati River from the city of Ahmedabad. There, rooted in the soil and sand and people of India, Gandhi grew to full stature as the leader of his nation. Ahmedabad's textile magnates and Bombay's shipping barons supported financially the inmates of Gandhi's ashram. The Sabarmati ashram consists of a group of low, whitewashed huts in a grove of spreading trees. A mile away stands the Sabarmati prison, where fighters for India's freedom were later incarcerated. Below the ashram compound is the river in which women wash their laundry, and cows and buffaloes wade. All around, the scene is gently pastoral, but not too distant are the closely packed houses of Ahmedabad hedged in by ugly factory smokestacks. Gandhi's room is about the size of a cell. Its one window has iron bars. The room opens onto a small terrace where Gandhi slept even in the coldest nights and worked during the day. Except for intervals in prison, Gandhi occupied that cell for 16 years. On the high bank which slopes down sharply to the river, Gandhi held his daily prayer meetings. Nearby is the grave of Mahatma Gandhi, the Mahatma's second cousin, who managed the ashram and died in 1928. His death has widowed me. M.K. Gandhi, reads the inscription on the stone. With the years, new houses were erected to accommodate the Indians who wished to be Gandhi's disciples. Some of the most active leaders of the independence movement began their political careers at the feet of the Mahatma in Sabarmati. The population of the settlement fluctuated from 30 at the start to a maximum of 230. They tended the fruit trees, planted grain, spun, wove, studied and taught in surrounding villages. In ancient India, ashrams and religious retreats for monks were well-known phenomena. Pilgrimages to 4 ashrams in different parts of the land signified that one's legs had proved the unity of India. Ashramites resigned from the world and, contemplating themselves inside and out, waited for the end while torturing the body to hasten it. Gandhi and his ashram, however, remained in closest contact with the world. The ashram, in fact, became the navel of India. Contemplating the ashram, Indians attached themselves to its first citizen. Nor did Gandhi ever purposely hurt his body. He had it massaged. He slept adequately. He walked for strength. All his dietetic aberrations, queer to many Westerners and even to many Indians, were designed to make him a biologically perfect instrument for the attainment of spiritual goals. Though he drastically reduced his food consumption, he did not want to be famished, and in South Africa he always carried chocolate-coated almonds to still sudden hunger. He remained, until he was killed, a healthy specimen. Who but a very healthy man could have fasted as often and as long as he did yet reach the age of 78? A photograph taken shortly after his return to India shows him seated on a platform, legs crossed, nude but for a short loincloth, making a speech while around him stand Indian politicians in European clothes. He soon told them to shed those garments. How could persons in Bond Street suits or Bombay coats and trousers win peasant support? Peasants? Politicians had nothing to do with peasants. They were hoping to persuade the British to withdraw or, at least, to ameliorate the imperial regime. To achieve this end you either had to shoot well or appear in striped trousers to deliver petitions in impeccable English to English bureaucrats. India's Independence Hall, they thought, would be papered with petitions and memorials addressed to a most gracious sovereign or the sovereign satrap. But Gandhi told them to get out among the people. To do so they would have to drop English and use the native languages of India, Hindi, Urdu, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, Bengali, Punjabi, etc., each spoken by many millions who had had no benefit of Western education or perhaps any education. Village uplift was Gandhi's first freedom. Over 80% of India lived in villages. India's liberation from England would be vain, he held, without peasant liberation from poverty, ignorance and idleness. The British might go, but would that help the 50 to 60 million outcast and untouchables, victims of cruel Hindu discrimination? Independence must mean more than Indian office holders in the places and palaces of British office holders. Gandhi wanted a new Indian today, not just a new India tomorrow. Gandhi's message touched India with a magic wand. Do not sign ally, a new vision opened. The Indian's heart aches for the lost glory of his country. Gandhi brought it balm. Gandhi in loin not sign cloth, imperturbable, prayerful, seated amid trees, not aping the British gentleman, but resembling a saint of antiquity, reminded the nation that India had seen many conquerors and conquered them all by remaining true to itself. Gandhi kindled India's pride and faith. His magic wand became a ramrod. Gandhi's message stood the Indian National Congress Party on its head. The Congress, as Indians call it, was born in Bombay on December 28, 1885. Its father and first General Secretary was an Englishman, Alan Octavian Hume, who had the blessing of Lord Dufferin, the British Viceroy. Hume at first proposed that Indian politicians should meet regularly, under the chairmanship of British governors, as a grievance court, but the Viceroy thought that Indians would speak more freely if one of their number presided. Hume placed both proposals before prominent Indians, and they chose the Viceroy's variant. This was the origin of the Congress. Hume remained secretary, sometimes alone, sometimes with Indian colleagues, until 1907. The Congress president for 1888 was George Ewell, an Englishman. For 1894, Alfred Webb, an Irish member of the British Parliament. For 1904, Sir Henry Cotton, a retired Indian civil service official. And for 1910, Sir William Wedderburn, former secretary to the government of Bombay. Gandhi praised Hume and Wedderburn for their devotion to India. They and all the congressmen of this early period saw India's welfare through constitutional reforms and administrative measures. The Congress was organized to channel popular protest into legal moderation. But into the channel flowed the fresh waters of national revivalism, spurred, in the second half of the 19th century, by the Tagore family, Sri Aurobindo, Swami Vivekananda, a dynamic, eloquent disciple of the mystic Krishna, Dadabhai Naoroji and Raja Mohan Roy, the first translator of the Upanishads into English. The World Theosophist movement, which paid permanent tribute to the ancient religious and cultural wealth of India, likewise fed that pride in the past which constituted the foundation of the movement for national regeneration. Thanks in part to the unification and orderly administration of the country by the British, Indian industrialists, Hindus and Parsis in particular, grew rich and began to buy out their British partners. The emergence of Indian capitalism and of a new Indian middle class gave a powerful impetus to the urge for self-government. Under these multiple influences, the Congress slowly outgrew its collaborationist boyhood and became a demanding youth. The prayers to British governors were couched in firmer terms, though as late as 1921, Tagore complained of their correct grammatical whine. Polite irritations supplanted polite invitations to high imperial officials to attend Congress functions. Some speeches and resolutions pressed for ultimate Home rule. But only a few extremists dreamed of converting the Congress into an active agent that would win Indian independence by mass action. Gandhi too was a collaborationist when he returned to India in 1915. Yet there was a revolutionary, anti-collaborationist potential in his yearning for an India that was Indian instead of a replica of the West in clothing, language, mores and politics. Gandhi craved for his country a cultural regeneration and spiritual renaissance which would give it inner freedom and hence, inably, outer freedom, for if the people acquired individual and collective dignity they would insist on their rights, and then nobody could hold them in bondage. The national metamorphosis Gandhi envisaged could not be the achievement of a small upper class or the gift of a foreign power. This made him conscious and critical of the shortcomings of the Congress. Before Gandhi sat securely in the saddle of the Congress he was the burr under the saddle, and it got him into trouble.